What happens when ancient religious texts are used to frame modern political conflicts? The connection between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's references to the biblical Amalek and the ongoing Gaza conflict is both chilling and thought-provoking. By invoking ancient enemies as metaphors, Netanyahu's rhetoric stirs controversy, raising questions about the weaponization of religious narratives in today's geopolitics. This video delves into how these biblical allusions shape perceptions, influence policies, and exacerbate tensions in one of the world's most volatile regions. The Amalekites hold a unique position in biblical history as the quintessential enemies of Israel. Portrayed as ruthless and deceitful, Amalek first attacked the Israelites during their Exodus journey, marking the beginning of a perpetual enmity. In the Hebrew Bible, Amalek symbolizes unrelenting hostility and moral corruption, often invoked as a warning against existential threats. This characterization shaped Jewish traditions and influenced interpretations over centuries. Understanding Amalek is essential to grasp the weight of Netanyahu's allusion. By equating contemporary adversaries with this ancient foe, the rhetoric transcends political boundaries, embedding the conflict in a moral and spiritual framework. This historical backdrop sets the stage for analyzing the controversial implications of modern references. Netanyahu's invocation of Amalek in reference to Gaza carries powerful, divisive connotations. By framing Gaza as a modern-day Amalek, Netanyahu implicitly casts the conflict as a moral and existential battle, aligning it with a biblical imperative for survival. This rhetoric is not merely symbolic. It mobilizes support by appealing to deeply rooted fears and religious convictions within Israeli society. However, it also alienates critics and exacerbates tensions, painting the conflict in binary, uncompromising terms. Such language fosters dehumanization, making reconciliation even more elusive. Netanyahu's choice underscores the risks of intertwining religious narratives with modern geopolitics, as it transforms policy discourse into a struggle framed as divine destiny rather than mutual resolution. Gaza's strategic and symbolic importance has made it a focal point of conflict for centuries. Once a vital trade hub in ancient times, it has evolved into a densely populated, embattled territory central to the Israeli-Palestinian struggle. Historically, Gaza has endured occupations, blockades, and conflicts, becoming a symbol of resistance for Palestinians and a security concern for Israelis. The ongoing hostilities reflect deep-seated grievances and political stalemates. By linking Gaza to Amalek, Netanyahu leverages this turbulent history to reinforce the narrative of perpetual enmity. However, this approach risks overlooking the complex socio-political dynamics that fuel the conflict, simplifying it into a narrative of good versus evil, which impedes meaningful dialogue and peace efforts. Religious texts, often revered as sources of moral guidance, have frequently been weaponized to justify political or military actions. Netanyahu's reference to Amalek exemplifies how scripture can be used to frame enemies as existential threats, compelling followers to rally against them. This strategy is not unique to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Throughout history, leaders have invoked divine authority to legitimize wars and suppress dissent. The danger lies in the absoluteness of such narratives, which leave little room for compromise. By casting Gaza as a biblical foe, the conflict becomes a spiritual imperative rather than a political dispute, making resolution increasingly elusive. This practice raises ethical concerns about the intersection of faith and governance in global conflicts. Netanyahu's comparison of Gaza to Amalek serves to dehumanize the opposition, portraying them as an abstract, archetypal enemy rather than individuals with rights and grievances. Historically, such dehumanization has paved the way for atrocities as it erodes empathy and justifies extreme measures. In this case, Amalek's biblical role as a relentless adversary shifts the perception of Palestinians from a people seeking sovereignty to an existential threat that must be eradicated. This framing not only inflames hostilities, but also undermines humanitarian efforts, as it dismisses the complexities of Palestinian experiences and struggles. Dehumanization through biblical narratives perpetuates cycles of violence, creating barriers to understanding and peace. Biblical rhetoric, such as invoking Amalek, significantly impacts societal psychology, reinforcing collective fears and biases. For Israelis, it amplifies a sense of existential threat, uniting communities around the need for self-defense. For Palestinians, it deepens feelings of marginalization and victimization, as they are framed as irredeemable adversaries. This polarization fuels radicalization on both sides, making coexistence appear unattainable. The widespread dissemination of such rhetoric through media and education further entrenches divisive narratives, shaping generational perspectives. These psychological effects not only perpetuate conflict, but also hinder efforts toward mutual understanding, as both communities become trapped in a cycle of fear and animosity driven by deeply ingrained myths. Netanyahu's use of religious rhetoric has drawn widespread criticism from the international community, including human rights organizations and political leaders. Many argue that framing the Gaza conflict as a biblical battle undermines efforts toward a peaceful resolution and violates principles of international law. Critics highlight the risks of inciting violence and exacerbating humanitarian crises through divisive narratives. On the other hand, some supporters see the rhetoric as a legitimate expression of national and cultural identity. This polarized reception illustrates the global stakes of the conflict and the challenges of addressing it in a world where religion and politics are deeply intertwined. The international response underscores the need for careful, inclusive language in conflict resolution. Throughout history, the invocation of Amalek has been linked to some of humanity's darkest moments. From religious wars to ethnic cleansing, leaders have used biblical justifications to frame enemies as existential threats, sanctioning extreme measures in response. Netanyahu's comparison of Gaza to Amalek echoes this pattern, implying that total annihilation of the adversary is divinely sanctioned. Such parallels draw uncomfortable comparisons to historical atrocities where similar rhetoric led to mass violence and persecution. This framing not only dehumanizes the opposition, but also risks normalizing disproportionate responses, fueling further violence. By drawing these comparisons, it becomes evident how invoking Amalek risks perpetuating cycles of aggression and undermining the principles of justice and human rights. Blending religious narratives with political conflicts raises profound ethical dilemmas. By invoking Amalek, Netanyahu's rhetoric transcends practical governance, turning political decisions into moral imperatives based on ancient texts. This approach risks alienating secular voices and marginalizing those who advocate for solutions grounded in contemporary ethics and human rights. Moreover, using faith to justify actions against Gaza diminishes the possibility of finding neutral, universally acceptable grounds for resolution. It highlights the tension between respecting cultural heritage and ensuring fair governance. Ethical leadership demands separating spiritual convictions from state policy, especially in diverse modern societies where shared values, not divisive myths, should guide decision-making. Resolving this tension is essential for achieving sustainable peace. As Netanyahu's rhetoric stirs controversy, international human rights organizations and political leaders are calling for accountability. These groups emphasize the need to align state actions with international humanitarian laws, which prioritize protecting civilians and avoiding dehumanizing language. Netanyahu's framing of Gaza as Amalek invites scrutiny over whether such rhetoric incites violence or justifies disproportionate military actions. Calls for accountability extend to holding leaders responsible for fostering narratives that undermine peace efforts. Advocacy groups urge reframing the conflict in terms of reconciliation and coexistence rather than perpetuating historical grievances. By promoting accountability, the global community seeks to challenge harmful narratives and foster solutions based on shared humanity rather than enmity. Continuing to frame the Gaza conflict through the lens of biblical warfare perpetuates a cycle of animosity, vengeance, and division. Moving forward requires rejecting these ancient narratives in favor of modern pragmatic approaches that prioritize dialogue and mutual understanding. Both sides must recognize the humanity in each other and the shared stakes in achieving peace. Breaking free from the weight of historical grievances opens the door to fresh perspectives and innovative solutions. Political and religious leaders play a critical role in fostering narratives that unite rather than divide. Replacing divisive rhetoric with calls for coexistence can transform perceptions and lay the groundwork for a future where peace is possible. Netanyahu's invocation of Amalek serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of conflating ancient myths with modern realities. As we've explored, these narratives intensify divisions, dehumanize opponents, and impede progress toward resolution. To move beyond this framework, leaders and societies must embrace narratives that prioritize understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. By acknowledging the shared humanity of all parties involved, the cycle of conflict can be disrupted, paving the way for peace. This issue is not just about geopolitics. It's about the stories we choose to tell and the future we choose to build. Let's challenge these harmful narratives together, fostering hope instead of hostility and inspiring collective action toward a brighter tomorrow.